wonderful to have you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate it, and we've developed a very good relationship, and we're going to be talking about trade and many other things. And we have a whole group of people, some traders and some other people. I see my top economy people.
US President Donald Trump says he has had extremely productive chats with Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney.
A couple moments ago, we got word that Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke with US President Donald Trump today. This brief news-driven announcement marked a decisive turning point in the months-long trade war between the United States and Canada. The trade policy launched by the Trump administration, aimed at rebalancing trade relationships, failed to achieve its intended goals. Broad tariffs under the banner of national security disrupted supply chains, raised costs for American businesses and consumers, and injected instability into global trade. The US-Canada confrontation escalated rapidly on increasingly irrational pretexts. In July, the administration announced plans to raise tariffs on Canadian goods to 35%, citing a rise in fentanyl and Canada's alleged unwillingness to cooperate. A detailed report exposed the baselessness of the claim. Fentanyl along the northern border is negligible compared to the southern one. Targeting Canada over fentanyl is a policy pretext rather than an evidence-based response to a genuine national security threat. More importantly, this policy ignores the near-inseparable integration of the U.S. and Canadian economies. Congressional Research Service data drawing on the U.S. Census Bureau showed that in 2024, Canada was America's third-largest source of imported goods, $413 billion. Canada is also America's largest foreign energy supplier across crude oil, natural gas, and electricity. The share of U.S. crude oil imports from Canada rose from 38%, 1.02 billion barrels. These figures are not mere statistics. They represent millions of jobs, intricate supply chains, and mutual energy security. Imposing sweeping tariffs on such a partner is not like pressuring a distant rival. It is like inflicting damage on a vital part of North America's own economic body. That failure to recognize reality, or the deliberate choice to ignore it, built the groundwork for inevitable negative consequences. Facing pressure from a much larger partner, Canada did not choose direct confrontation. According to MarketWatch, Canada would lift its 25% tariff on roughly half of U.S. goods targeted since March as a gesture of goodwill while seeking to reset relations with Washington. But tariffs on U.S. steel, aluminum, and automobiles would remain firmly in place. By lifting tariffs on $21 billion worth of consumer goods, Canada handed the Trump administration a symbolic victory that eased political tensions. By keeping tariffs on core industries, steel, aluminum, autos, Canada preserved its most powerful tool of economic pressure. In essence, Canada used the framework of the USMCA, a signature Trump achievement, as leverage. By complying with and emphasizing the agreement, Canada put the U.S. in a bind. Attacking Canada would mean undermining Trump's own trade legacy. The strategy's effect was visible in Trump's sudden shift from confrontation to conciliation. Politico reported that Trump called Carney's move a nice gesture. Speaking to reporters in the Oval Office, he said the two sides were negotiating a deal and would soon resume leader-level talks. "We want to treat Canada well." This 180 was a direct result of Carney's strategy. By rolling back part of the tariffs, Canada gave Trump a face-saving symbolic win. Attacking Canada now would mean attacking his own accomplishments. Carney explained the philosophy with a hockey metaphor. The move lets Canada focus on strategic sectors, remain consistent with USMCA, variously referred to in shorthand, and emphasize arrangements where mutual benefits are clear. The agreement supports it, but the economics drives it. Yet the move did not receive unanimous support at home. Labor pressure was intense. Unifor President Lana Payne warned that rolling back retaliatory tariffs was not an olive branch, but an invitation for further aggression. Canada should not abandon countermeasures unless the U.S. lifts all of its unfair tariffs. The backlash underscores Carney's political risks, but overlooks the larger strategic picture. By positioning Canada as the reasonable partner, Carney is preparing for the critical 2026 USMCA renegotiation. He confirmed that Trump himself committed to restart negotiations following this move. Canada and China are the only nations that retaliated against Trump. By pulling back from full-scale retaliation while keeping tariffs on key sectors, Canada set itself apart from China. Perhaps the most ironic consequence of the tariff policy lies in the cost it imposed on the U.S. economy itself. Promises of jobs and prosperity through protectionism did not materialize. Instead, American businesses and consumers bore the heaviest burden. A ricochet effect where a policy designed to hurt an opponent ends up harming its initiator. U.S. importers facing rising costs and uncertainty rushed to exploit legal avenues in the USMCA framework to minimize damage. Customs data analysis revealed an alarming trend. Companies raced to claim USMCA exemptions as tariffs escalated. The share of goods from Canada classified as USMCA compliant jumped to 81% in June, up from 56% in May. Imports from Mexico meeting USMCA criteria rose to 77% in June, from 42% the prior month. This behavior shows market resistance and imposes administrative costs and uncertainty on businesses navigating shifting legal terrain. In essence, U.S. companies worked against their own government's policy. The burden did not stop in compliance departments. It passed straight to consumers as higher prices. Analysis from the Center for Economic Policy Research showed that Trump's tariffs were almost entirely passed through to U.S. consumers and importers as higher prices, costing about $42 billion per year. That is a massive indirect tax on households, eroding purchasing power and threatening growth. Canada's steel industry, a vital link in the auto and manufacturing sectors, became a stark indicator of systemic strain. Catherine Cobden of the Canadian Steel Producers Association described the situation as life support. We took a major bullet wound, and on Monday we got 407 more stabs with the new tariffs. The pain is not limited to Canada. U.S. manufacturers dependent on Canadian steel and aluminum, from Michigan automakers to construction firms, face higher input costs that erode competitiveness. A policy designed to protect American industry is in practice hurting it. Against this backdrop, Carney's decision to lift most retaliatory tariffs sent shockwaves. The opposition branded it a humiliating surrender and a betrayal of campaign promises. He had vowed elbows up, to handle Trump, and to negotiate a win. But behind the appearance of retreat, a cold strategy is underway. The numbers reveal a brutal reality for the United States. The North American auto industry is bearing roughly $12 billion in tariff costs. Corporate giants report losses in the billions. The Congressional Budget Office projects that tariff policies will shrink U.S. economic output, make consumer goods more expensive, and temporarily pressure inflation. This is not surrender. It is a calculated move to flip the board, exploiting weaknesses in America's domestic, economic, and political structure. Canada has transformed a defensive posture into a sophisticated strategic offensive, and the U.S. is beginning to feel the pain. Retaliatory tariffs, designed to be surgical, were hitting sectors in the U.S. that were compliant with the trade agreement, becoming an irritant in larger talks. By removing that irritant, Canada neutralized excuses to delay substantive negotiations. Ottawa acted first, presenting itself as the rule-abiding, good-faith partner. If the next round collapses, responsibility can no longer be pinned on Canadian intransigence. Instead, it would expose the unilateral nature of the Trump administration's policy, disadvantaging the U.S. internationally. With its new strategy, Canada ensures America's pain is widespread and deliberately concentrated. The auto industry in Michigan, steel in Pennsylvania, tourism in New York, politically sensitive battlegrounds, are targeted pressure points. Canada understands this leverage and is using it to force Washington to confront economic reality. Canada's actions are not merely tactical. They aim to change the playing field for the long run. The ultimate goal is to protect and strengthen USMCA, the most important asset in Canada's relationship with the U.S. USMCA, replacing NAFTA in July 2020, provides preferential duty-free treatment for more than 98% of tariff lines and covers more than 99.9% of bilateral trade. By positioning itself as USMCA's defender, Canada prepares for the 2026 renegotiation. Ottawa believes the U.S. domestic process to consult on the 2026 review is underway. Canada is doing the same. And Canada is not acting alone. It is building a strategic alliance with Mexico to form a unified bloc within USMCA. This forces the U.S. to choose: remain a trusted partner in the North American Pact, or become the bully isolated by its two closest neighbors. The cooperation greatly enhances the bargaining power of both Canada and Mexico. More importantly, Canada is reminding the U.S. of its unavoidable dependence. America may have the larger economy, but it cannot achieve strategic goals without Canada. Canada is an irreplaceable supplier of critical minerals for the electric vehicle and high-tech transitions the U.S. seeks. Policies like the Inflation Reduction Act would be hollow without stable supplies of nickel, lithium, and cobalt from a reliable partner. By cooling down the current trade war, Canada underscores its indispensable role in America's economic future. In the end, Canada's strategy exposes a truth Washington must face. Dependence on partners is a reality of a globalized economy. Attempts to break that order lead to isolation and self-inflicted harm. Food prices at Aldi tell the story at the checkout line. Essential items, including coffee and cheese, have suddenly doubled, alarming consumers about inflation and tariffs. New policies, especially a 40% import tax on coffee from Brazil, disrupted a supply that provides more than a quarter of U.S. consumption. Aldi shifted to Colombia and Ethiopia. Higher shipping costs, longer delivery times, and higher import expenses. Barissimo coffee jumped from $3.49 to $6.89 in under 6 months. The shock hits fixed-income households hardest. It is not just coffee. Rising tariffs and import costs pushed up prices for cheese and salmon. Cheese climbed from $4.50 per tray to $10, almost doubling. A family with a $250 monthly food budget now spends an extra $20 on cheese, forcing cuts to fruits, vegetables, or snacks. Anxiety rises as households wonder how long the surge will last. New tariffs, like the 25% hit on EU products such as Parmigiano Reggiano, French cheeses, olive oil, and wine, push prices higher. European producers warn U.S. consumers will be priced out of premium imports. Retailers may shift to domestic alternatives to avoid costs, but quality and unique characteristics are lost. Protected, geographically indicated products cannot be replicated. Older consumers accustomed to traditional quality notice subtle differences in taste and texture. What was a small indulgence becomes an unaffordable luxury. Aldi's short-term stabilization by swapping imports with domestic products cannot mask the deeper shift. Discount models depend on sourcing high-quality, low-cost goods from global markets, especially Europe and South America. When those supply chains are hit with heavy tariffs or disrupted, retailers are forced to localize and raise prices. The result is a creeping transformation of the consumer basket: less variety, lower quality, higher cost. This is the ground-level consequence of a geopolitical gambit gone wrong. Canada, rather than escalate endlessly, has changed tactics, lifting broad consumer-facing tariffs while preserving pressure on strategic sectors, leveraging USMCA's rules, and positioning itself as the responsible actor ahead of 2026. The U.S., meanwhile, confronts rising prices, strained manufacturers, and fraying cross-border commerce. The board has been flipped, and with this week's call, the players sit back down, Canada holding the pen over the next chapter, the United States feeling the ricochet at home.